When polished prose costs almost nothing to make, what exactly are you trusting? Pew tested nearly 500,000 English-language web pages and found significant signs of AI authorship in more than a third of those published since ChatGPT's release. Fluency no longer tells you how the words got there. So what does this mean? The old web simply borrowed trust from the cost of writing. We all assumed it was human written. The next one has to earn it through proof anyone can check whenever we need to know that it's human written. That's today's lead. Also in today's episode, antibodies facing an ungameable test, science grants rerouted into one agenda, 3 battery advances with unequal proof, and a full-length AI film facing a challenge about the soul. Come with me, let's get into it. Everyone who reads online has now lost an old shortcut. For most of the web's history, someone had to sit down and write a page to make it competent. That human effort put a floor under how much text could even exist. But that floor is disappearing. So how much of the web now carries AI's fingerprints? Pew Research Data Labs sampled nearly 500,000 web pages from Common Crawl, a huge public snapshot of the internet. Its classifier looked for patterns linked to AI writing or heavy editing, things like punctuation habits, sentence rhythms, and common transition words. And yes, these are imperfect, but this gives us a general benchmark. And in the July 2026 crawl, roughly 1 page in 10 showed those signs. And when Pew looked specifically at pages published since ChatGPT arrived in late 2022, the share rose past 1/3, and it also climbed across the publication months that the researchers measured. Now, there's an important limit to mention here. Pew's classifier estimates the probability that a machine was involved. It doesn't necessarily deliver a clean human or machine verdict. Much of the flagged material probably came from a person and a model both working collaboratively on a document. And Pew's method only estimates how the writing was made. It doesn't necessarily score whether a page is true or not. That distinction really matters now that AI involvement is no longer unusual. Now, the deeper change here is economic. The cost of producing a decent paragraph has fallen so sharply that human writing time is much less of a limit on how much text can enter the web. Now, that does bring friction. Spam and cheap filler can multiply faster than people can read or edit or even check them. A polished sentence can now arrive with almost no effort behind it, which means polish carries less information than it used to. You may remember that in an earlier edition of the Century Report, we covered Amazon reportedly buying and destroying rare books printed before 2022 in order to get clean human-written training text. And Anthropic was caught doing the same thing. OpenAI likely has too. That story and Pew's results meet at the same threshold here. Human-only writing has become scarce enough to seek out, while mixed human and model writing is becoming very ordinary. Now, there is more to think about here than what you see in the standard coverage. Every worry in this story assumes human writing was the thing being protected and that it was inherently worthy of protection. But look closely at what that floor was actually holding up, and you'll see that it was as much a barrier wall as it was a supporting floor. Most of the human-written web was already filler. Scarcity has never been a quality check. It only felt like one because much of the filtering was done for you by the time you read the material. Algorithms and the interests of people and institutions you have never met had always had more control over what you read than you do. And then there's the ability side. Writing 800 clean words, for example, is a trained skill. And if you were taught it, you got to be heard. If you were not, or for whatever reason could not follow the traditional methods, your idea stayed only in your head. A nurse who has seen something real, a machinist who knows why the part fails, someone thinking in their native language, so many other examples. Many of them had important things to say, but no accepted way, according to the old Gates, to write them down. So the other side of the fear-based coverage on this is that those gates are coming open. And here's the thing, we've seen this happen before. Socrates thought writing would destroy memory. He was right, something was lost. What he could not see, though, was the gain, that every idea written down would outlive the person who had it. The printing press did it again, the calculator did it again, and arithmetic stopped being the floor that you had to walk through to reach mathematics. The camera in everyone's pockets did it again. A lot of things that used to be one person's skill or one person's capability became something anyone could see, anyone could write, anyone could do. Each time there was real fear about a real loss. Each time, though, the gain was larger and inherently welcomed more people. So the real question then is about what is in front of you right now, this show even. Is it any good? And more importantly, is it true? A purely human byline never guaranteed positive answers to either of those questions, and a model's involvement never ruled them out either. Those questions have always been there. Is it good? Is it true? Our shortcuts to those answers have never been great, but with each leap forward, like the one we're seeing right now, they get better. And the encouraging part as well is that checking whether something is human-written or AI-written is also advancing alongside the generation. The same broad advances that help produce synthetic text also helped Pew detect its fingerprints across hundreds of thousands of pages. That is how the next layer starts here. At first, the verification is visible and yes, a little awkward, and then people start to build it into the background. The browser padlock eventually disappeared because encrypted verification became normal, not because anyone decided that security no longer mattered. Authorship and whether or not it's human or AI written, or if that even matters, will head the same way. A page can now carry its own provenance with it, where it came from, what changed, which parts a person or a model touched. You might also remember in an earlier edition of the Century Report, we covered that AI-generated images are causing a lot of concern with authenticity as well, because they're getting so believable and so real. And the same thing is happening there. The provenance will be traveling increasingly with the material. Now, that won't tell us what to believe. It will give us a better record of how the thing in front of us came to exist in the first place. When fluent text is abundant, then that record becomes far more useful than just guessing from style. And again, pay attention to what is being gained here more than what the coverage says is being lost. All right, this record becomes urgent once the output could become a drug. Patients need an antibody that actually binds in a live experiment, no matter how impressive its design looks on paper. Can AI systems reliably design better antibodies? A new competition called AIntibody, AI-Antibody, tested that under prospective blinded conditions meant to make tuning around the results harder to do. 29 organizations submitted 511 antibody sequences aimed at one part of the virus that causes COVID. Every designer stayed blind to the experimental answers. Independent labs then measured how tightly each antibody actually grabbed its target. Lower numbers mean a tighter grip. And the models did deliver one spectacular result. In a task where they had to improve an antibody that already worked, an entry from Aurica Biosciences reached 95 picomolar. Now that is very tight bonding and roughly a 2,000-fold improvement over the starting molecule. But then the test got harder. When teams had to rank which sequences within 3 groups would bind most tightly, most models performed worse than selecting clones at random. Only one beat that baseline. When they had to design binders outside the training library, results swung wildly between teams. Across the first challenge, just 0.6% of submissions cleared the high bar of binding below 100 picomolar, in other words, really tight binding, which, by the way, is one of the first and most important steps toward any kind of drug becoming effective. One of the strongest overall entries used no AI at all. ProBiogen used a consensus approach, combining common features across sequences. It finished third overall and earned perfect scores for developability, which means that the molecule passed the benchmark's 5-assay developability threshold. So this tells us something really specific. AI could refine an antibody design, but only after another method had already worked out how it binds. Making a strong new key from blank material remained much less dependable. It tells researchers exactly where the capability holds and where luck still does too much of the work. The successful designs, though, still do stand. Now, yesterday's edition of the Century Report covered Claude-designed protein binders working against 14 of 15 targets. That was an encouraging result from one system. Antibody gives the wider field a common test that no participant controlled. Also, protein structure prediction matured through a similar contest called CASP. Teams submitted answers before unpublished structures became public, so nobody could fit a method to the result afterward. That honest scoreboard helped the field recognize when AlphaFold had made a genuine leap. Antibody design now has the beginnings of its own scoreboard. No fully AI-designed antibody has full FDA approval yet. The first regulatory submissions that cite prospective benchmark results could arrive in roughly 12 to 18 months. Patients gain more from a demanding shared test than from another company grading its own work. It shows every team where the models are already useful, where they fail, and what the next round has to solve. All right, that shared scoreboard proves distributed scientific judgment does work, which is why the NSF cuts hurt graduate students and young researchers so much. Their careers depend on winning one grant at a time. The National Science Foundation is on course to issue about 6,100 new grants this fiscal year. That's roughly 30% fewer than last year and the smallest total since the early 1980s. So where did that money go? The NSF's overall budget didn't just vanish. About $1 billion of its $8.8 billion budget now sits in a central account. The administration plans to use it for White House grand research challenges in advanced materials and AI, with 2 years to spend the money. NSF also pulled another $300 million from 2 divisions after proposals had already passed expert review. That rescinded, cut, or delayed about 150 vetted proposals. The Education Division also lost $110 million tied to 3 diversity programs that the Justice Department deemed unconstitutional. Now, what this does is it transfers authority from many expert review panels to one centrally chosen agenda. Now, advanced materials and AI will, of course, produce valuable work. We do need that. But nobody has shown that this central bet and eliminating as many experts as possible in order to fulfill an individual agenda will outperform the hundreds of projects that are already chosen through distributed review. And the cost lands now. Researcher Jarrett Wilcoxon described proposals trapped in a pending purgatory. One involves a shared scientific instrument meant to serve 21 laboratories. A freeze on that purchase stalls work across many teams at once. Neil Lane, who led the NSF in the 1990s, called the maneuver unprecedented. Lost training time can echo for years. Graduate students leave. Young scientists miss the first grant that would have kept them in research and they go somewhere else. A short interruption now can appear decades later as a missing cohort of experienced researchers. Now, there is a counterweight here, though it doesn't replace those grants or undo the damage. The price of doing serious research is falling. Open model weights, published datasets, and shared computing systems let more people attempt work that once required access to a wealthy institution. Still, a central $1 billion? Sure, it can push one chosen program forward, but it still can't fully gather the ability to ask questions back into one office. And even so, with the falling cost, more people do now have that ability, even as the country's main basic science funder narrows who gets the conventional support. All right, shifting away again. With distributed research under strain, grid builders still have to decide which battery advances that they can trust today. 3 of them arrived together, and the evidence behind them couldn't be more different. So which one is ready to actually carry some weight here? The loudest number recently in solid-state batteries came from Geely. The company says that it's preparing a solid-state battery targeting 500 watt-hours per kilogram, well above the energy density of today's best commercial cells, and it's aiming for pilot production in 2027. Now, Geely has not disclosed the chemistry or released independent cell testing. CATL, BYD, and Toyota are pointing toward 2027 or 2028 with varying figures. For now, 500 watt-hours per kilogram is a manufacturer's target awaiting confirmation. The most solid result appeared in Nature Energy. Researchers improved a sodium-ion battery by using iron to manage how the battery draws energy from oxygen inside its crystal structure. That oxygen process used to damage the material as the battery cycled. So think of it as a spring that returns only part way after each use. The iron helps it snap back into full shape. The team raised reversibility from about 75% to 99%, and its tested pouch cell reached 206 watt-hours per kilogram and kept nearly 9/10 of its capacity after 100 charge and discharge cycles. Now, sodium batteries are attractive because sodium is cheap and abundant. A dependable sodium battery could take pressure off constrained lithium batteries, especially for grid storage where weight matters less than cost and durability. And then there's the development that needs no forecast. On August 18th, LG opened North America's largest battery cell factory in Lansing, Michigan. The facility cost more than $2 billion and can produce over 35 gigawatt-hours of cells each year. LG originally designed it around electric vehicles, but it shifted toward grid storage as the demand changed. The plant already employs 900 people with 800 more planned. U.S. domestic cell capacity is now on track to nearly quintuple, reaching about 96 gigawatt hours. Officials across the political spectrum praised the LG opening under the banner of energy dominance. That applause tells you what happened to the argument in the first place. Once storage got cheap enough, it stopped needing to win as a cause. It became infrastructure that leaders wanted built into their own districts. So the trust order is clear, and we see it in all three of these. The sodium cell has peer-reviewed testing, but a ways to go. Geely has an ambitious figure, but it still needs independent proof. LG has a factory with the ribbon already cut, but all three of them are moving forward. All right, that battery story shows what happens when costs suddenly drop, and filmmakers are now watching the same thing happen beneath crews, cameras, and locations. Higgsfield AI has released The Cully Hill Boys, a 110-minute action comedy assembled in roughly 4 weeks. The budget was $2 million, and about half of that budget paid for AI tokens. That is the cost of running generative models rather than a physical production. The film also uses licensed celebrity likenesses. So, did Higgsfield prove that AI can make a movie people will care about? The finished feature proves commercial-length production is possible without sending a crew out into the world, for example. It doesn't, however, settle what audiences will feel when they watch. Reviews singled out the human screenwriter as the film's strongest element. Now, director James Gray has no patience for the larger industry push with AI use. While promoting his celluloid-shot film, Paper Tiger, which Neon will release on November 13th, he called the whole AI movement obscene and predicted that it will fail. Gray said, "AI is not going to be able to get at all of the infinite layers of the soul." He expects physical film to return the way that vinyl did after digital audio. He is objecting to something built from countless human details, what an actor carries into a performance, what a director notices in a room, and what happens between people that nobody planned. But even with that objection, Higgsfield has still crossed a significant threshold. Someone has now assembled a feature-length narrative without any physical production. Gray is raising a different question, though, whether that process can even create the human depth that makes a film stay with us. Both questions are important. Access to filmmaking and command of filmmaking have always been different things. The old production system fused them together by making the attempt so expensive that most people never got to try, which is why we never got to really answer the question. AI does begin pulling those questions apart. The Cully Hill Boys proves that the price of finding out is falling fast. Now that is a wider door, which is very much a good thing. Still, whatever comes out of that process will still depend on taste, experience, judgment, and whatever those infinite layers of the soul turn out to require. All right, let's bring it to a close for today. Trust used to hide inside cost, because a web page, for example, took time to write. A film took time and money to produce. An antibody took years to test. Scientists needed an institution's grant. A battery needed a factory. Those costs kept out plenty of junk, but they also kept out people and questions and ideas that legitimately deserved a chance. Now the floors and the walls are moving. Pew found that there is likely machine involvement across more than a third of the web published since ChatGPT. Antibody showed how we can test hundreds of design molecules without anyone seeing the answers first. Battery research gave us a peer-reviewed result that can stand beside a manufacturer's unverified target. Higgsfield showed that a feature can exist without physical production. And the NSF story showed the danger of letting one central agenda decide which questions receive conventional support while hundreds of other vetted projects have to wait. If we restored scarcity so fewer things get made, that would just preserve the same gates that excluded most people in the first place. The answer then is stronger checking tools everyone can use, and also challenges to the foundational questions we are even asking here. Does it truly matter if something was human or AI written or a collaboration between the two? Because a page can carry its history, a drug design can face a blinded assay, a battery can publish independent cell tests, a film can still reach an audience who decides themselves whether it's worth carrying home. Now, as generation gets cheaper, verification does become more valuable. Yes, that's a good trade when the checking stays open. We get more attempts, more voices, and more experiments, and more people are able to check the evidence themselves, work that expense used to do for us by accident. Increasingly, you are going to be able to trust what comes out of this process. And again, you will more and more realize how much that question itself has shifted entirely. The hopeful thing to realize here is we are already building that, and we are already asking those questions, and that will mean a significant amount in the near future. We'll see you tomorrow.